So we're now into the second part, which is CloudOn, or instantiation, because CloudOn is our term that we love, and instantiation might have a little bit more meaning. And that is because I'm sure this morning that you woke up and thought, I love archives. There are people out there who love backups, people out there who love archives. Sorry that I just insulted you when you raised your hand already, but oh well. No one ever.
I love data.
No. My name's Andrew Miller. Happy to work with Rebecca and Chris. I work at Rubrik. You can find me on Twitter. I blog infrequently. It's been a lot of blogging on Rubrik, not as much on my own blog. That's hard. And if you've seen Chris's intro slide where he has his spirit animal as a llama in Amsterdam and Rebecca gets a koala, then I can jolly well have a kangaroo. So we looked at first cloud cluster. Basically, this is the foundation that we can run in the cloud. And then we're going to move on to cloud out, which is a foundational part to get to cloud on. So there's no slide here for cloud out, but this is because it's a foundational capability that we've had for a long time. In short, you can take your backups that you've had on premises, and I'm going to get it wrong eventually.
On-prem.
I'm going to get a stink eye from somebody I know when I do it.
Say on-prem, and everybody's happy.
Everyone's safe. Thanks. So that you can take your backups on-prem, and then instead of keeping them forever on Rubrik, as Chris alluded to, which is relatively expensive if you don't want to do that, we did actually add the ability to archive out to tape if you must, but the way that we preferred for you to do it for years, that you can send that up to relatively inexpensive blob storage, S3, Azure Blob, et cetera, right, that kind of thing. However, what you get out of that is not necessarily a lot, right? And I'm not downplaying this because there's more recoverability there than you had out of tape. And at the same time, also, you can do single file restores out of the cloud, not pull a whole 100 gig VMDK back. But at core, it's archive. So now, as we go into CloudOn, we're going to build on top of that. And if you missed it, this was in some of our webinars, we called 3.2 our more cloud release because of cloud cluster. And 4.0, we called it the even more cloud release. And of course, that's a pretty big build up for CloudOn. So there's got to be something here other than more cowbell, if you would prefer to listen. If that actually puts you in a happy place, because whenever I think of that, it's like, it makes me feel happy. So CloudOn, what is it? It is the ability to take take an archive snapshot of a VM that is living in the cloud and power that on. That's simple, but yeah, there's got to be a lot of stuff going on under the covers to make that happen. So when we're doing this, we actually go and kind of troll through the .vmx file, because starting out today, this is a VMware to AWS specific feature. There will be more in the future, right? The foundational concept is the same. So we give you a recommendation on the config file. Two-click deployment with orchestration. So that even goes toward that in the UI, it's relatively simple. And the orchestration is the aspect that if you're thinking about that you're uploading all of the incremental VMDK backups up to S3, that's not necessarily consumable by anything on the Amazon side. So we do stuff to take those, merge them all together, turn it into a flat monolithic to stream optimized, pull it into the VM import service from Amazon, which notably doesn't cost you money when you call that service.
By the way, is that
Yes.
is that leveraging the relationship between VMware and AWS specifically?
Not yet.
Okay,
Not yet.
so it's not using that piece of it.
No, not at all. So this is
doing a full
Interesting.
conversion to an AMI, does that then take time, or are you
It does take
fudging
time.
the bits underneath? Okay.
It does take time.
So
And that's
it's a copy migration to, yeah.
And that's even why, I'll go to the last bullet point, because that's a perfect segue, and then I'll back up, is that we can do this on demand. When you do it on demand, we'll see in the demo, you've got to wait for however long that conversion time is. We can't help the conversion time, but what we can do is we can give you a constant conversion option that every time that a new backup archive is uploaded, we trigger that off so that it's ready for you, right?
So you could use that for a dev test, for example, or for a DR, so something's ready to go, it just can power up.
You might be stealing my use case slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's here in a couple of slides, but yes, you're exactly right. Exactly right.
Yes, the same thing.
UI integration, launch, power on. Yeah, it's in the UI. And this is where, this is now a little bit of marketing, but when we talk with customers, sometimes you see differences between sectors, healthcare, finance, et cetera. This was something that every single customer that we talked to wanted, like this is something I want. And as well, because we talked about, we started with backup and recovery as a use case, but we consider that to be one use case. This really aligns with the whole, we're a cloud data management company, we're looking at hybrid cloud enterprises, right? I mean, this is not a traditional backup and recovery feature. With that, we are into demo time.
Andrew, hey,
Yes.
what's the, and you may get this into the roadmap later, what's the plans on moving back if you need?
Right now, nothing public. However, happy to go further into that in an offline session as we finish up today.
Gotcha.
Very good question, though. And now, who was I talking with? Justin last night. Anytime you say very good question, it's a tell that you're thinking about the answer. So it's like, but I said it after I gave the answer. I didn't say it at the beginning, so I wasn't like stopping to delay for time. Okay. So we have our Rubrik cluster here, which due to the magic of timing has timed out on us, and we can see that there. So I will take this full screen. So thanks to Michael Fall, who will be coming up a little bit later as part of the SQL Live Mount section, we do actually have a VM up here that we are using in various ways. Does this want to go? There we go. Okay. So there's multiple ways that we could go there. For instance, we've got this virtual machine. It's called se-mfall-win. We have it protected with the Rubrik policy, right? A brief pause here. The policy is our core construct that applies to all different data types, whether it's Windows, Linux, SQL, VMware, and then you set the core things you care about, how often you back up, how long you keep your backups for, archive and retention, right? Brief, like that's the core here. If you're not comfortable with that or familiar, look back at previous tech field days. But as you can see in here, we've got one Windows host protected. In this case, just to kind of overload the demo, I'm going to go to it via search. Pardon me 1 minute as I have most of the demo memorized, but I also was good and had notes to make sure I hit on all the key points. So as we go into this, as we look at this, we have the regular console, and let me make that a little bigger. That work for everybody? So here we can go in, and because we did just stand this up recently, actually frankly for Cloud Field Day 2, you can go in every green dot is when we have a successful backup, and you can see here that we've been doing a good bit of backup. It's not a lot in here, just C: users. But normally when you come in here, actually I think I got the Windows instance. So let me make sure to get the VM. Here we go. Here's the VM. Because of the things that we wanted to demo and integrate, we actually are backing this up at a virtual machine level, a Windows level, a SQL level. So lots of different ways you can slice it. So normally you would have, point in time. You can see in this case we're taking backups about every 4 hours. The traditional options around live mount and instant recover, we've done for a while, single file export, but you also have this neat launch on cloud option. So this is keying off of the existing cloud archive locations that are set up. I'm not going to go to that setup screen, but it's basically your AWS S3 setup where you've got to choose your bucket that it's going to go to and your keys so it's encrypted. You can choose where you want to put it. It actually goes and checks to find the security groups. So this is a live view of the security groups out there. Of course, you can, currently, this does put it in the default VPC and subnet. You can change that afterwards. And in a next dot release, actually, there will be the option to choose that in this screen if you want to. And then, of course, it's actually going and looking at the VM and saying, hey, I think this is an m4.xlarge based on what's in the VMX file, mapping it out, because I don't like keep m4 dot whatever and t2 dot. I mean, there's a lot of options there, right, kind of thing. So we're trying to simplify that for you, especially in an on-demand scenario. If you really want to, you can go and do a custom instance type. In that case, you need to type it in manually. Now, for the sake of this, I will go ahead and launch this, but to the question earlier, this will take a little while, because even though it's been archived up, it's actually going and calling a conversion process. But I want to keep it focused for right now. We'll go kind of under the hood, back on the slides a little bit, but I want to think about, okay, so what's the customer experience? Like I'm doing this as an end user, as a customer, whoever. So it's either I go in here, I see the one screen, and I wait a period of time, or let's say that I really don't want to do that. So I've got this option over here for configure cloud conversion. That is literally what it says. Can even make that a little bigger. Convert the latest snapshots into an AMI, and either delete the older ones by default or keep them. So this is literally just a slider. You turn it on. And if you want to keep the older AMIs, so be aware, this takes storage. This has a storage cost because these are EBS-backed AMIs, but there's no compute cost here when you're doing this constant conversion option. That even goes right toward the DR use case that you were thinking about. And I'll steal from 3 slides from now about thinking about a computeless DR option. That's a little bit different in the spectrum of DR things that we have, like priority tiers and that kind of thing.
So basically, from a storage cost perspective, you'd be keeping 2 copies of the VM. One would be the one ready to go. As a new one comes in, it'll do the conversion and delete the old one.
Unless you choose that, say, I want to keep
Yeah,
all of these,
okay.
because that's phenomenal in a dev test scenario, or maybe even in a scenario of DR where you know that maybe you want to keep it back further, and then maybe you're doing some manual cleanup kind of thing, because you don't want to just have the most recent copy for that. So I can kind of play around with multiple ways I'd go at it. When you come over here in the interface, we have a new cloud mount section under live mounts. If you've seen this in previous versions of Rubrik, it was just live mounts. Now there's for Hyper-V and SQL, we'll see that in a minute, and cloud mounts. So this is actually one that we fired up the other day. And you can see here, I'll call out, so this is the MFall VM, and I'll just make that a little bigger, to kind of show that this isn't smoke and mirrors. I mean, we created this for the demo here today, but if you look at this AMI instance where it says, 3B91, if we go under the AMIs, we can see all the AMIs that are out there that have been constantly converted kind of thing. So, you can actually see that down here we've got, hey, that's the one out there, and there's actually some other ones out there because we have this continuously converting, as well as the other VMs that were in this policy, some CentOS VMs, one that had Puppet, all relatively small things just because it takes time to replicate up and down kind of thing, but legitimate for this purpose. Where I want to go to finish this is that when you look over in Amazon, again, to kind of show there's not smoke and mirrors here. So we go here. There we go. So if you remember that 3BN1, we come over here into AMIs. I might have kind of pre-populated 3BN1. You can see that there's an AMI there that's available. And then even more when you come over into instances, because it's not a VM in Amazon, it's an instance, right? Because you're not supposed to keep it forever unless you do, that kind of thing. And actually, we've got this one that's called the MFall on demand. If you scroll down and look at this, you can actually see the AMI that it's based off of, as well as the public IP number. So kind of to finish this out from a demo standpoint, we have the RDP session up, because we might have pre-staged this a little bit just for the sake of going quickly. So if you look at this virtual machine, this is actually literally the jump box that we're using for some of the administration. So this was actually a CloudOn instantiated, used to be a virtual Windows machine on-prem. And we took it up, we converted it on demand. It took a little while, right, kind of thing, because there's not, from an Amazon perspective, it's actually up here and running. And now this is a little bit like if you've seen old disaster recovery or site recovery manager demos where it's like, wow, I did all this stuff and I have Windows running out there. That's really cool. So to make it a little bit more applicable, keep it from a user standpoint. So this actually had SQL running on it at the time where we backed it up. And we actually had several databases out there, such as the classic, AdventureWorks 2014. We've actually got a table out there, et cetera, kind of thing. So this is it was running SQL, backed up, archived over, converted over. It's running up there.
So are these backups happening to a different AWS region? Like I'm thinking the DR scenario, and that's really, to me, the only time it's relevant, right? If there's a problem with your region, you may want to bring your servers online in a different one. How are you protecting that data?
So in this case, one of the most common ones would be that you are on premises and you want to have a cloud DR option. There's the multi-cloud aspect, which I think is what you're thinking about, is say inside Amazon, but this could actually be an option where you're on premises and looking it up and having it run up in the cloud. Or you could go, it seems like we're talking not hybrid cloud, but multi-cloud more as much.
Yeah, I was thinking about the scenario maybe where you're just in the cloud and you're backing up servers.
If you're already there, then cross-region,
right?
Either cross-region or even cross-cloud if you wanted to actually replicate using Cloud Cluster, or you could have Cloud Cluster protecting and then actually sending its replication, because it is the same code base, so a Cloud Cluster running in AWS could actually be archiving over to Azure. Not that would make either Microsoft or Amazon terribly happy, but it will work.
A cloud cluster in Northern Virginia and a cloud cluster in California, replicating, stand it up in the opposite region when one goes down.
That sounds expensive.
Yeah, that's
Cloud to cloud, going out of one and into another.
The main note there
be
is that we are
expensive.
working on, and this is now gets into kind of sales and pre-sales type engagement around cost calculators, because you're right, if you approach it the wrong way, it becomes prohibitively expensive, and then it kind of falls down. But from a technical standpoint, this is working. We actually have customers that are doing
versus region to region, right, within the same provider. That would be
What
Region to region costs will still
level of
charge you
insurance
too
policy?
Yeah,
in
I was thinking
AWS,
about
but at least if it's done through Rubrik, it's deduped. Otherwise, it's stored like in S3 and then S3 copied from one to the other. But it's not. It wouldn't every time there's a change that would be.
Actually, it'd be deduped too if you went, like if you're going from AWS to Azure, it's deduped in AWS before it gets sent to Azure, right?
When we replicate between
either way.
clusters,
Yeah.
the replicated traffic, if it's cluster to cluster, that's always deduplicated and compressed. If we're doing a cluster that's archiving, just to
Yeah.
a bucket basically, or a blob, we're only just sending the incrementals, and that is in a Rubrik format that's already been deduplicated and compressed as well. So major impact there from a cost perspective. I'm obviously dancing around quantifying that with hard numbers, but this is why we work from a kind of a calculator standpoint with customers.
Are there any requirements to deploy the cluster within a same AZ, or can we span AZs for protection that way?
A single cluster similar to on-premises, on-prem, actually needs to be locally linked. So on-prem, it would be local 10 gig links. So a single cluster would always be in the same region, but you could have different clusters in multiple
Can you
regions.
span AZs in the region?
As long as the links are fast enough. That's really the core technical answer.
I'm just thinking from a protection standpoint. If I have 4 nodes and one AZ goes down, I still have 3 nodes in a surviving AZs.
So then, in terms of the DR scenario where you said on-prem to cloud, don't I have to have Rubrik on-prem?
Yes. In that scenario, yes.
Go back to Justin's comment.
You could also have Edge running locally on-prem, right, and back up to cloud cluster as well. So you don't have to have a physical appliance. You can have their Edge virtual appliance doing that as well.
And Edge is the single node remote office, branch office that we provide specifically for that kind of scenario. And different performance characteristics just because, frankly, it's running not the code, but it's running on top of whatever virtual infrastructure you happen to have out there versus running on our own boxes that are dedicated.
Okay, so then can you clarify the question he asked earlier where you said there's no failback? So if we want this for DR, I'm going to want to fail back.
So right now, the failback would be a manual process,
Okay,
being
so
frank.
it's just-
So it's a one-way. This is where I'll freely say in 4.0, we have introduced CloudOn. The same comment of happy to go further in an off-camera session, but today that is what it does. A little bit under the hood. I almost wanted to just jump to use cases and then come back, but I think I'll finish out the under the hood if I can beg your indulgence. Hopefully it makes sense. So what we're doing here under the covers, just think from a customer perspective, very simple operations. The UI, pretty transparent. We're setting the archives up to S3, we're AWS. We're at the point where you request CloudOn, or it's going and making a recommendation. And then what we're doing under the covers, this is where we're actually doing a transient, ephemeral, dissolvable, take your pick Rubrik node that we actually spin up, in this case in AWS. And that's actually handling the conversion process because it's having to assemble all of those incrementally uploaded VMDKs, which is a serious thing because you want to have your cake and eat it too of I want to be able to upload incrementally, but the import service doesn't want it in incremental, it wants it in stream optimized. So you've got to go from incremental to flat monolithic assembled together, then to stream optimized, then you can pull it through the VM import service.
So the conversion
Yes.
always happens after you request a CloudOn.
If you do the on-demand option, yes.
Okay.
If you have the continuous option checked, it's actually doing that every single time that there's a new incremental pushed up.
Okay, I missed that part. Thanks.
Good question. And then finally, actually almost finally, because there's a 5, then either you're launching it on the cloud or the AMI is sitting there ready for you. So at that point, there's no cost except from a storage standpoint because it's an EBS-backed AMI. And then we power down and we purge that temporary Rubrik node unless you have chosen enough options where there's constant CloudOn conversions happening. If so, it stays around.
So that Rubrik node is only temporary. You're not going to use your existing, say, 4-cluster AWS Rubrik node. This is just for that conversion.
Correct. Very intentional design decision to enable this to work, whether you're doing cloud cluster or not. We'd love for you to do cloud cluster, but you don't need to. And this is actually something that's just managed by whatever brick is calling that process, and then it's disposed of when not needed.
What incentives exist, pardon me, to stop developers just leaving these things running forever? Oh, because I need it, which happens. we would need to do that? Like a customer would need to have some sort of financial control.
At this point, you would need to do that manually.
Burning a lot of money for no reason. Yeah.
The one other piece, if this has been on demand, and I can even go, I won't jump back into the demo. I can pull it up later. But there is a screen where you can see all the cloud mounts that have been requested by Rubrik, and so you can at least track and monitor all of those, and then delete those. I'm going to go a little bit to API and other items. Michael, please.
Well, I was going to add into that. So Rubrik's API driven, right? So when you want to talk about leaving stuff out and saying, hey, I want to clean this up. I mean, we have internally in our own labs, and we can certainly help customers with this, but we can develop scripts using our REST API to go through and do the cleanup for you. So that, while it's not baked into the product, we have all the tools there to enable it and make it happen.
Yeah. I'm envisaging something like ServiceNow that we spoke with earlier today, where it's like you order it up and it comes up and then it just keeps billing that particular cost code. And it's like, if you want it on, that's fine, but you've got to pay for it.
I will say, at least from a financial incentive standpoint, we don't have any incentives to make you keep running that stuff out there. So we're happy to help you clean it up from an API perspective or otherwise, or even future product capabilities, that kind of thing. But it's not like we are baked into trying to increase your cloud bills because we get a cut of that.
No, but it's also about how, I mean, one of the things would be, if it takes a long time to spin one up, I mean, that's one of the issues with why I would say I will over-provision stuff because I don't know, I may not be able to get it later, or it takes ages and I'll need it. So I won't destroy it, which means I'll incur costs that I don't necessarily have to, as long as it's very quick and easy to turn on.
And that's the exact reason behind that continuous option and the keep one AMI versus keep all of them.
Yep, okay.
To actually almost mitigate that kind of question.
Yep, cool.
Use cases are always hard. Sometimes I want to put them at the beginning because it's kind of why you care. But if you put them in the beginning too soon, it's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Think of the architecture. So in this case, use cases at the end will almost be done. We talked a good bit about Cloud Sandbox for test dev. I don't think I need to beat that to death anymore, except that from a future standpoint, I realize I took Brian's question and put it in a futures category. I will actually talk roadmap here for 1 minute. We have a firm commitment from product management that in the year 2030, not only will we have a cloud sandbox, but we have a in-yard sandbox option as well. So this is for, the main benefit here is that for all of us who can't explain to our kids what we do, or our nieces and our nephews, if you're Rebecca, expect this to spur IT adoption. That didn't go over quite as well as I thought. It was funnier when we worked on it in the dry run.
Sounded
That's why it's gone.
gone.
But I mean, that's just like happy memories, right? I mean, for everybody, come now. Disaster recovery. So talking about this as a uniquely computeless option. There's far more that we're going to keep going, but we see this as a foundational capability because we are handling some stuff where if you look at what's happening under the covers, there's a good bit of moving parts just to make this happen. Lift and shift might be a dirty word, but this could be facilitate one-way conversion options. This is where you're probably treating whatever cloud option is a little bit more of an IaaS and not going into the full refactoring, that kind of thing, but can be used for that because we are helping with either on-demand or pre-staged, and that even goes from a lift and shift standpoint to thinking about the windows of cutover windows and downtime, and I'm going to move certain things.
Do you have customers that are actually asking you for that?
We have customers that are very interested in reducing data center spend and thinking about how they can take resources and move them to the cloud. Specific where they're going to use it this way, I'm honestly not sure. But I know that anything they can do to move things that direction, they're interested in.
But I'm trying to, I guess what I'm getting at is kind of more of a reality as opposed to a potential. Do you have customers that are actually doing that today? Because if the answer is yes, then I have a follow-on question to it. If the answer is no, then we can move on.
I know the answer is yes from talking with our product management team. I'm not going to pretend that I know some of the details about the customer scenarios, but I'm happy to take a shot at the follow-up. I could have said no and gotten out of it, but
So what are they experiencing after they make that move?
As in after they're actually migrated into the cloud.
Yeah. So in that model.
In this model, they're usually picking up specific applications, and this may even be a little bit more of an Azure play than an AWS play in some ways. They're trying to take certain application sets, pull them over, and not have to run them on premises, sometimes triggered by the traditional, I've run out of data center space, I have to go to an entirely new rack. I've got an incremental cost that's triggering a big physical data center expansion. that kind of thing.
But you are seeing this, and I'm sorry to kind of make sure that we're real crystal clear on this question, but for lift and shift, no refactoring. They're moving an application, you have customers that are moving an application to public cloud, and they're happy with it, and they're not, there's no further
Or that it's
activity happening after
sufficient
that.
for their purposes for the time being. I don't think there's anybody who necessarily loves lift and shift as an option, but sometimes it's better than the alternatives. From I've got to add this much more from a storage array standpoint, or other on-premises type options.
For people who've got lots of small data centers, which cost a lot of money, and they can shut down half of their data centers by just lifting and shifting into an IaaS cloud.
That again, I think this is great potential, but when I run the numbers, doing that.
It is expensive, yeah.
That's very expensive. That's like.
This takes me back to my days when I used to do actual combinations of V plus C plus E stuff, and we'd cost it out compared to AWS and say these are the numbers. So.
And I'm not saying it's like 20, 40% more expensive. I'm talking about multiples. The numbers pan out to be, that is multiples more expensive.
The usual thing is people have no idea what the on-prem costs often.
Because that's true
too. But I know of people who are a very distributed organization who is running, a single rack in, I think it's sort of 70, 80 colos around the world. And that costs a whole bunch of money to maintain that. So that's a use case. But yeah, I would agree that lift and shift is not an ideal, but people have strategic reasons for maybe doing it. But I mean, I don't know whether you necessarily use Rubrik for that, because there are free tools out there. If it's a one-time conversion, I don't think this is your perfect,
it's an option in there.
Yeah.
There may be a reason why it was number 3 on the slide.
Yeah.
Finally, and this is a little bit similar to what we're talking about of customers and APIs. Chris referred to customers who get excited about some of what we're doing, which is really cool. And that anything you do here, you can call from an API standpoint. So we are, frankly, pretty excited to see what else people come up with that we're not thinking of. You may have some wheels turning in your head already of they should have had some other things on the use case slide. Or that because all of this can be called as a RESTful API, this can be a foundational capability that may underlie some other orchestration and automation products.
I want to go back to the second bullet on the previous slide. So DR. So if you have to do that conversion process, either continuously or on demand, that's going to have an impact on the RTO and the RPO, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what impact that's going to have?
Sure. So this is definitely within the spectrum of DR options. I'm not going to obviously put this like a synchronous or asynchronous array-based replication, okay? So the factors here that play in from I'll start with RPO perspective, right, because RPO and RTO. So RPO perspective would be the frequency of how often we're backing up at a Rubrik level, how long that's taking to go up to the cloud, and then that continuous conversion process. So generally, when we look at the VM import service from Amazon, the timing can vary, but you can often get RPOs that are converted to an AMI, like that final what I can use, that can be in the 12 to 24 hour range, dependent on the size of the VM. Your mileage may vary, default supply, right? From an RTO standpoint, actually pretty fast, because I actually thought about going through and doing a manual launch of an instance from an AMI. I mean, you can click through that in the GUI within 60 seconds if you know what the screens look like, that kind of thing. So the RTO actually ends up being really fast from a OS running standpoint. And then, of course, we get into what the applications are that need to run to the business level. I'm online.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Especially if it's multi-tier. So does that answer the question?
Yeah. I just wanted to get a feel for, what levels are you aiming for? So is this going to be a 15-minute version? Is it going to be a 24-hour?
If we're talking kind of classic tier 1, 2, 3, 4, we are still operating in some of the lower tiers as far as being real about the capabilities. Just because, you think about moving that data up there, but if this is built into your current strategy and it's cost effective for some things and more reliable than other options that you may have out there. And moving the dial further on that over time, but we are good on time, but I want to keep going to the third section here, but any other questions before we keep going?
Real quick, do you guys natively tag the instances when you're spinning them up in EC2?
Not yet.
Okay. Is that going to be an option to add tags? Because I'm kind of going back to thinking about Justin's question, like how do you manage ongoing costs? if you can tag that and run, some Lambda function to report on that, then
You can already track it by virtue of either looking at the Rubrik console, that cloud mount screen,
Yep.
and either frankly calling that and then making the correlation out of a script, because you can call everything via an API. There will be more options as far as tagging in the near future.
The only other question I had is using Cloud Cluster, maybe going back to Rebecca's, it's still a client on the EC2 instance, right? Or is that changing?
So Cloud Cluster.
An agent.
An agent.
An agent in there.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Okay.
You still have to put an agent on the instance to back it up with Cloud Cluster, right?
Correct.
Is there future plans to change that and to be able to select EC2 instances from the console?
Yes. I may put that into the
Okay.
follow-up session afterwards, but yes.
Okay.